guys. I can see some people are trickling in now, which is awesome. Hi, hope everyone's doing okay. All right, I'm going to get started because we've got a lot to get through. But I think some people will trickle in as they go. So welcome everyone. This is the first lot of the mentoring training. It's going to be on strategy today. And I want to start off by saying welcome to the 2023 to 2024 patient group mentoring program. I'm Hannah. I'm the senior project officer here at Beacon, and I'm also the mentoring program lead. So you'll be seeing a lot of me and hearing a lot from me, especially over this next month or so while we're in this training period. But I'm really excited to kick start this with this first session looking at strategy. A quick little intro to Beacon. So we're a UK-based rare disease charity. We have a vision of no rare journey alone and a mission of building a united rare disease community with patient groups at its heart. Our work focuses around three main areas. Our main focus is patient group training. We help groups meet their rare challenges by supporting them to form, grow and professionalize. Another focus we have is rare disease research. We help patient groups find a place at the heart of research so they can better ensure the outcomes and improve access. And we also strive to create a rare disease community by facilitating connections and collaborations. So that's a little bit about what we do, but just moving on to some housekeeping for today's session. So please do just let us know if you can't see or hear what's on screen, just in the chat function. In terms of questions, there will be a Q&A at the end of the presentations. So we can just keep your questions until then, just in case, because we don't want to miss anything that might be going on in the chat. And if you're not speaking, if you just keep muted, we don't want any weird background noise, and the slides and the recording of the session will be available at the end of the session. Also, if you do need transcripts, we have untranscript enabled. You can do this at the bottom of your screen, so you can show them or hide the subtitles, depending on what your preference is. So on to today's session. This is the agenda for today. So we're going to hear a little bit from Laura Silk from Costello, and she's going to be talking an introduction to strategic planning. Then we're going to have a little break, and then we're going to hear a case study from Beacon CEO Rick Thompson. And in the session, we're going to explore how to develop a clear mission and vision for your organization and why this is important. We'll also look at what strategy is and how you can begin to develop a strategy, the benefit of thinking like a business, and real examples of strategic decisions. And also there's going to be time for interactions and breakout groups as well. Okay, so like I said, we have our speakers. So we have Laura Silk, and she's the head of strategic operations at Costello Medical, and Rick Thompson, our CEO. So I am going to now pass on to Laura, who's going to be giving our first presentation. So hi, Laura.
Is that coming through okay? Perfect. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, Hannah. So yeah, I thought just to start a little bit about Costello Medical, assume that people may not have heard of us. So we are a healthcare communications agency. So we mainly work with clients like pharmaceutical company and yeah, to help them sort of present all of their clinical data. A bit about, yeah, I guess us as a company and me within that. So I joined the company in 2010. The company was 8 people at that point, so very much a startup. Now we are nearly 400 people, so we've grown rather quickly. And my job here is head of strategic operations. So it's essentially to think about where we're going to go next and how we're going to get there, really. So although we are a for-profit company, we do have quite a strong focus on sort of doing good and giving back as well. So we achieved B Corp accreditation last year, and we have a pretty long-standing relationship, I think it's fair to say, with Beacon, having collaborated on a lot of different projects and initiatives, most of which were sort of on a pro bono basis. So yeah, I think Hannah's already sort of briefly mentioned some of these points, but what I was going to cover today is development of mission and vision statements and why they can be useful, and and then moving on to a tool called a strategy map, which tries to sort of make you think about what objectives you need to focus on to achieve your mission and vision, and then you can use those objectives to devise key performance indicators or KPIs, which can help you track how well you're doing as an organization. So I am very conscious that many of you will have very limited time to be spending on sort of strategizing, I suppose, and a very, very different perspective to that of mine, which is essentially a large for-profit global company where those things are a lot more formal, I suppose. So yeah, I just thought I'd say at the beginning, don't be put off by any sort of like business terms on these slides at all. I think really what I'm going to be talking about is how you can do most good with the limited time and resources that you have available. So that sort of like business thinking and all of these tools can hopefully be useful, but that's essentially the key question at the end of the day, I suppose. Good, so I'll start with the mission and vision, and we developed this back in 2018. We didn't really have a formalized mission and vision statement before that. And it's essentially just aimed to answer a few questions like, what does it actually mean for us as a company or as an organization to do a good job? How can we measure whether we're doing a good job? You probably have sort of some sort of idea, but yeah, do you actually know on all aspects? What are your long-term goals? And actually also, is it clear to our audience what those long-term goals are and what the main things are to support them? So you probably have sort of like a feeling about all of those questions, but you might not really necessarily have like a nicely written out answer. And I think that's where having vision and mission statements can help. Yeah, so the difference between the two, personally, I don't really think we need to sort of overthink this too much, but essentially what it's meant to be is that the mission is sort of like your way of working towards your goals of how you do what you do or what you actually do, and your vision is sort of what you want to achieve as an organization, so more sort of why you do it. So I have a few examples of mission and vision statements, which I think are, some of which are good, some of which are not quite so good, I think. So yeah, these are a few examples of ones that I think are quite good. They're quite sort of clear, but also quite sort of specific to the organization that that they belong to. And then this is quite a good example of one that, sure, that might be true, that might well be your your vision to delight our customers worldwide all of the time, but that probably goes for most companies with customers. So that's, yeah, probably not quite so useful because it's not really something that people can really recognize you in, and also it doesn't tell you anything about what you actually do or how you're going to achieve that. Yeah, so similarly, to be the world's most valued company, well, it may sound nice, but you haven't even said what it actually is that you do as a company. I personally quite like the to make people happy one, that's Disney, so I think it does suit them fairly well. And yeah, essentially this one at the bottom, yeah, it's quite a nice example of something that is pretty ambitious to make every brand more inspiring and the world more intelligent. Yeah, for a company that's making stick-on labels. So yeah, essentially, I think my point here is that to be sort of like quite specific and recognizable as the organization that you are is sort of the point of a mission and vision statement, not just to sound as sort of ambitious as you possibly can, but being pretty generic and like less meaningful in the process, I suppose. So just to show you another example, I suppose, yeah, this is our mission and vision. So yeah, mission is we enjoy building lasting partnerships in the healthcare sector by providing an exceptional service, and our vision is to be a community of the very best people, challenging ourselves to make meaningful and outstanding contributions to improving healthcare. So these statements are on our website like that, but internally when we discuss this with employees, or I guess with sort of like stakeholders who are a bit closer to us, I have also got some notes on a slide that we often present to go along with this. So essentially saying what we mean and why we put each of these sort of like words or phrases in there. So for instance, in the mission, you know, the words enjoy was actually something that we thought about pretty long and hard, how we could sort of like put that in. Yeah, that was something that's the feeling of that was quite important to us. That it's not just a job, it's something we really want to do and we sort of feel passionate about. So I hope that sort of makes sense and helps making like these mission and vision statements a little bit more accessible, I suppose. So in terms of how to develop a mission and a vision statement, I've put a few questions on this slide that I think are some of the key ones to think about. So so what makes us us? What are our overall goals? What are we actually trying to achieve? Again, something that you probably have a feeling about it, but putting it down in words is actually probably harder than you think. What are you sort of what do you think you will look like as an organization in 3 to 5 years time? So what is that sort of like medium to long-term goals that you're aiming to? What makes us different and unique, and I guess what are specifically sort of our ambitions. So there are obviously questions that you will have a lot of thought about yourselves, and that's great, and that's definitely a really important starting point. But a few things that could be quite helpful here is actually also to run either a short survey to get input from patients and other stakeholders and what would actually be most useful to them, perhaps, or a focus group. So that's one of those maybe sort of like business jargon terms, but essentially just a short meeting with some key people who you want to get their opinion on this. So that could work quite well. Alternatively, if you sort of think, well, I'm probably the best person to think about this. First of all, you could develop the mission and vision statements now and then ask for feedback afterwards to make some smaller tweaks on that basis. So what we did when we developed our mission and vision statements is that we started off by asking for input from all employees. So, and I've copied a bit from the email that I sent around to the whole company. So with a few questions in there, what would you like the company to achieve? What makes us different or unique for clients, and what makes us different or unique for employees? And we got some really incredibly useful feedback from that. We then had a strategy meeting with all of the leadership team, which I think at the time was probably maybe sort of about 12 to 15 people. And we did a post-it exercise, which was quite fun. Essentially, we had everyone in that meeting put down what they thought were the most important sort of concepts for them that needed to go into the mission and the vision, and then once we collected everyone's post-its, we sort of made little piles of things that were similar, and we sort of like tried to challenge each other on what aspects we thought were the most key and what could perhaps be left out. But then the statements were then just drafted by just me. I wouldn't suggest that you try to do that with a load of people in the room, because I think it's not going to be a very efficient way of doing it. So off the back of that, we thought what could be really useful is for you to actually just all have a bit of a think about that now. The first breakout group exercise, I think Hannah is going to move you into little breakout groups. But what I thought might be worthwhile is for each of you as an individual to take sort of 5 minutes to jot down some concepts that you could include in your mission and vision statement. So but like if you think back to sort of my slide with our mission and vision, the words like enjoy or community or those sort of concepts is what I mean. I've put questions on the right hand side here that are there to sort of guide you in that, and then thought it might be worthwhile to sort of discuss those in small groups and explain to each other what you sort of do with your organization and what you want to achieve. I would definitely not suggest that you try to sort of like draft your mission vision statements now. Like, please don't fret over like the actual wording, making them sound nice. That's something I spent hours and hours doing when I tried to develop our mission vision statements, but now is probably not the time for that. The important thing is just to think about and trying to articulate what actually is it that you want to achieve. So does that make sense? And then Hannah, can I leave you to sort people out into breakout groups?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm just going to send everyone off into their groups now.
Great. So hopefully people are back into the main room now. So I'll continue on, if that's all right. Yeah. Good. So I hope that was useful. I'm a little bit torn in the sense that I sort of want to hear what people came up with, but I'm also conscious of time because I have another meeting at 11 and really want to make sure I get through all of it. So I think I will just leave it for now. Yeah, I hope that was sort of a helpful exercise to do and to discuss with each other as well. Yeah, one sort of final sort of point that I had on around mission and vision statements is that they don't have to be statements. If that is something that you think would be particularly helpful to you and to your organization, then by all means do develop them and publicize them. And here are sort of a few questions that you could use once you've drafted them to sort of sense check that they sort of are suitable fit for purpose, I guess. So all of those questions that I put up before, does it actually answer all of those? Occupations and other stakeholders recognize us in this. Have you been sort of specific enough in linking to the sector or the disease area, for instance, that you're working in? Is that sort of is that correct, and is that sort of easy enough for people to follow? Is there anything sort of missing or duplicated, and did the statement sort of flow well enough? So what we did is, once I drafted the statement, we sort of literally posted them on sort of notice boards in all of our offices and got people to stick on sort of like post-its with feedback and questions, and then I issued sort of responses to all of the comments received as well, some of which we implemented, but also we explained when if there were certain things that we didn't implement, why that was essentially. But like I say, what the main thing for me here is that you've thought about these questions, not necessarily that you've got snazzy statements that you can put on your website or communicate to people. That's up to you whether you want to do that or not, I guess. Good. So I'll move on to the strategy map, which is the next step. I guess first of all, for someone who's got strategy in her job title, it's actually a word I've never really liked, because I think my connotations with it are someone sat in a bit of a stuffy office strategizing whilst the rest of the organization went on with their day-to-day business and didn't pay a huge amount of attention to what they were doing. So and I guess there's sort of a time and a place for developing strategy, but if you spend so much time making plans that you don't actually have any time or energy left to act on any of them, then there's not much point. So I guess, put quite simply, strategy to me just means how you're going to achieve your vision and your mission. And the strategy map, which is the tool that I was taught when I did my MBA, and which I personally think is really helpful, can sort of help you work to achieve the mission and the vision, the things that you want to achieve in a number of ways. So first of all, it's just having sort of a good thinking exercise about what it actually is that you need to do to achieve your vision and mission, and then setting objectives related to that, but also then staying on track and monitoring progress towards those goals, and essentially just making sure that you're focused on the right things that are going to make the biggest difference. Just to say, there are lots of different ways that you could do that. The strategy map is just one tool for that. So if there's a different way that works better for you, that's fine. This is just what we use, so that's why I chose this to present to you. And it may sound quite complicated, and there are a lot of organizations which have very complicated strategy maps, but it can be scaled down quite a lot. You may end up with just a few sort of boxes on your map depending on your needs. I've got an example of a really nice simple strategy map in a minute, actually. Good. So the starting point for this is something called the balanced scorecard, and that comes with 4 perspectives. So this is it as I was sort of like taught it, I guess, but more applicable to for-profit organizations. So the 4 perspectives are financial, so anything to do with profit, cash flow, revenue, costs, customer, so your relations with them, products, quality, your customer service as well, and innovation. And then there's internal business processes, so anything that you need to do in the background, so efficiency, management structure, logistics, planning, that sort of thing. And then finally, learning and resources, which I guess is more focused on sort of employees, HR, training capabilities, that sort of thing. And I think where this tool can be quite useful is that, so to give an example of what I was finding at Costello Medical before we implemented this, is that often we would have finance meetings, which meant we were talking about the finances of the company, and we were coming up with lots of ways to make things more efficient, to cut costs, to increase revenue. And then we would go into an HR meeting the next day, and we would talk about lots of ways to make employees happier and to give them more training, which essentially meant spending more money, making things less efficient in certain ways. So we were sort of almost coming up with, like, we were having 2 separate discussions and never making the link between those 2 and going, okay, but as a company as a whole, what's the most important? Is the most important to increase our profit margin, or is the most important thing to make employees happier and give them more training at this point in time? So I guess the purpose of sort of that balanced scorecard is that you look at both financial and non-financial things, at short-term and long-term things, and think about sort of the picture as a whole, and not just focusing on one element of this. We had a bit of a go, I don't know how successful this is, but we had a bit of a go to sort of slightly adapt this so it's a bit more a bit more applicable to like charities and organizations like yourselves, I guess. So changing finance more to fundraising, obviously the fundraising, sort of what money you've got coming in on one side, but also the costs, what have you got going out on the other, beneficiary, so the quality, the services that you provide, innovation, and then processes, still, anything to do with, planning and efficiency, and the resources that you have. And I think in discussing this with Rick and Hannah, I think Rick mentioned that maybe as, organizations that you represent, there's maybe often also a tendency to sort of be pulled more towards, I guess, the fundraising and the beneficiary element, but not necessarily as much the processes and the resources. So that's why, that's essentially why this is a useful tool, to sort of make sure that you think of all elements of like running the organization at the same time. So what we then do with that to build a strategy map is that you take those 4 perspectives and you think about the key objectives of what you think you need to achieve in each of those areas. And then you essentially just try to build a map. So you would put your vision and your mission, which is, as we've said before, what you're actually trying to achieve. You put that at the top. And then you think about those 4 different perspectives and the objectives that you've come up with, and think about how they feed into each other. And I've got a simple example on the next slide, which will hopefully make that a bit more clear. But essentially, the idea is that you can then read the map from the top to the bottom, and you're asking sort of, your vision and your mission, what you want to achieve. Okay, how are we going to do that? Whereas if you read it from the bottom to the top, it answers the question of, okay, well, why are we doing these certain things? And then the next step, which I'll talk about a little bit later, is then moving from that to KPIs, key performance indicators. So this is a really simple example, hopefully, but these are the 4 perspectives for an airline. So the learning and growth or learning and resources perspective, that the ground crew needs to be aligned with company goals. That feeds then into the objective in the business processes of having a fast ground turnaround, and that then can lead to lower costs, which increases profitability. It also leads to on-time flights and the lowest prices, which leads to increased revenue, which also leads to profitability. So hopefully that will sort of help show that, you know, that if you read it from the bottom to the top, it tells you why these things are important, and if you read it from the top to the bottom, it tells you how you're going to achieve increased profitability in this case. Just as a quick note, I think that's in for-profit companies, that's quite common for like the financial perspective and the profitability to be at the top. That's sort of the main goal of the organization. For us at Costello, actually, that didn't feel quite right. Although profit is important for as a for-profit business, we actually put it all the way at the bottom as to sort of say, okay, well, this is what we need to do in order to achieve all of the other things that we want to achieve in the other process, in the other perspective. Sorry, I hope that sort of makes sense. And a few notes on sort of good strategy maps in from my point of view. I think it needs to be meaningful and really personal to the organization. Simple. I think once people start sort of thinking about objectives, it's easy to come up with loads more, but actually it's better in many ways to sort of scale it back so that it is really just the few most important things. And then develop and agreed collaboratively and definitely understandable by all stakeholders. It needs to be something that, you know, again, is simple enough that people that other people can sort of understand it without too much extra explanation. So here are just a few examples of like objectives that we've come up with at Costello. And that brings us to the second exercise. So I think, Hannah, I don't know what you think, but with timing, perhaps maybe we should just try and keep this to just 10 minutes rather than 15, if that's okay. So, but essentially what I would suggest is that people just spend a few minutes again jotting down some key objectives that you think are the most important to achieve your mission and vision. So essentially what you did in the previous exercise. So what do you actually need to do? What do you need to what are your sort of objectives and goals to achieve mission and vision? And then in small groups, just discuss what you came up with, and are there any suggestions that you can give each other? Those perspectives are there in order to be helpful. So if you can't sort of place one objective particularly, don't worry about that. It's meant to be helpful. It's not meant to be prescriptive, essentially. So, okay, it looks like everyone's come back in now. So I think I'll get going again. Great. I hope that was a useful second breakout exercise. Again, sorry, in the interest of time, I'm just going to leave it at that for now, move on, because I really want to do the final bit of my presentation as well. But I think Hannah is going to sort of ask for some feedback after I've had to dash off at 11 o'clock. So I'll just make sure that I get through this last bit before then, essentially. Good. So the final bit is on KPIs, key performance indicators, again, one of those business terms. Essentially the idea about having KPIs is that as a group of KPIs, that they should give sort of like a high level overview of how your organization is performing, considering all aspects of it. In a company, that would normally be sort of like reviewed regularly to make sure that you're on track to sort of achieve your goals, your objectives. In my mind, it again is much easier to come up with like a long list of the various things that you measure. It's much better if you have a much more concise list, so something that you can actually realistically stay on top of, measuring, reviewing on a regular basis. And I think another good point that Hannah and Rick made when we talked about this is that they can also help to measure impact, which I think for all of you as organisations can be really relevant for grant applications and the like. So hopefully sort of there's a nice link there to something you sort of have to do anyway. So essentially the idea behind KPIs is that you think about like a lot of different factors that you could measure, that you could consider, but you choose sort of the one thing that is most important and that you're going to review regularly. So coming back to this slide, this is what I showed before. You've got your different perspectives and you've thought about all of the objectives that you're trying to achieve, and how they sort of like feed into your vision and your mission. And then for each of those objectives, essentially you're thinking, okay, so what are the KPIs that I need to measure to know whether I'm achieving this, whether I'm on track. So I've just given an example, which I hope is helpful. And this is a bit of our strategy map on the client perspective side of things. So, so some of our objectives are for clients to feel like they're getting a great deal in terms of the quality of the work that we deliver, the customer service that we provide, and also value for money. Another objective when we put this map together was that we really wanted to sort of be more involved in like giving strategic input to clients as well. And both of those things lead to sort of client retention and growth, which is sort of our higher level, I guess, objective, on the client side. So I've just copied in like a little bit of text from the sort of overview of KPIs that I put together. So some of them are the average rating on quality, on customer service, and on value for money from client surveys. So yeah, that relates obviously to that sort of to that first box on the left. But also I considered some other things that we decided not to include because I didn't think they were sort of like as key in terms of performance indicators. So for instance, the percentage of proposals that we sent to clients that we didn't win, because there's so many different reasons that could be. So that's not really actually that helpful to be able to spot trends. So what would you actually do with that information, I guess? Another thing that I considered was measuring client retention, because obviously that would be a really direct measure of, I guess, the client retention and growth objective, and also the lasting partnerships part of our mission. But I essentially decided there that, if you see client retention start to drop, it's sort of already too late and there's too long a lag time for that to really be useful. You want to know what the second the client started to become a little bit less happy. You don't want to know 6 months later when you've already lost a client, essentially. And then on the sort of deliver strategic input for client side, we went with the percentage of proposals for projects to clients that we ourselves tagged as strategic. So that's pretty subjective. It doesn't measure like the impact of what we're actually, the impact that's actually having on clients and their strategy, but that's really difficult to quantify. And I sort of thought at that point, in any case, that was a good enough, that was a useful measure for the initial aim to sort of increase the number of projects where we were offering that as part of it. One other important thing is to consider targets as well, I think. So what are you actually aiming for your KPI to be? How do you know if it's good or bad? So for instance, that first example of the average rating of quality service value for money from the client surveys, do you say, I want that to be at least 9 out of 10? I want it to be 10 out of 10, be aspirational and say, well, we won't rest on our laurels until it is that. Are you mainly interested in changes over time? So do you want to make sure that this quarter it's no lower than last quarter? All sort of, valid reasonings there. And for the percentage of proposals tagged as strategic, you want to say, okay, well, we want to eventually get that to 50%. That's just an arbitrary target, but you have to pick something perhaps, and if so, by when? Or do you again want to sort of think, okay, well, the important thing is for it to be increasing over time, so I want this percentage to be higher than last quarter, or I want it to be 10% higher than last quarter, or something along those lines. I hope that makes sense. So if factors to consider for the KPI, so what objectives on the strategy map does the KPI link to? Why is it important? The formula, so how are you actually going to calculate it, and the source of data. Have you actually got those data to hand? Is it reasonable for you to be measuring that? Frequency, so how frequently should you monitor it? Again, it's not a case that the more the better. I think it needs to be meaningful. If it's something that goes up and down a lot, it's probably going to be better to look at it from year to year than from month to month. The target I've mentioned, how do you actually know whether something is good or bad? And also I think the action, like what will you actually do if the KPI is below target? Because if it's something you're not going to be able to do anything about, then maybe there's also not that much point in measuring it. Yeah, and just as a reminder, I started off with sort of talking about the balanced scorecard and the point that these 4 perspectives can sometimes pull you into different directions. So the goal shouldn't really be to improve everything all the time. The goal is more to sort of think about what aspects of your organization you think are already good or already good enough, and which need your attention the most. So I actually attempted a sort of adaptive traffic light system where red means needs attention, but amber actually meant fine within your target range, and green was better than your target. So it was actually something that could be compromised in order to improve other areas, so other perspectives essentially. So that brings me to the end of my bit. It is 11 o'clock on the dot, so I probably haven't got any time, actually, I'm sorry, to take questions right now, but I've put my email address on there, and genuinely very happy for anyone to reach out if you do have any questions that are perhaps a bit more theoretical. And yeah, I think, like I said, Hannah suggested that maybe there could be a bit of discussion with the various groups now. So I'll hand over back to you, Hannah, if that's okay.
Of course, and I just want to say a massive thank you to you, Laura, for taking your time and giving that really great presentation. So thanks so much.
No problem. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Good luck, everyone. Bye.
Bye, Laura.
Hopefully you've got a nice big slide in beacon branding. Lovely. Right, guys, so I've been chatting away already. For those that don't know me, my name is Rick, and I am CEO at Beacon for Rare Diseases. I've been Beacon now for over 7.5 years, which is getting to be quite a large number, actually. And I know I've met many of you separately, and many of you I haven't met before, so it's lovely to see new faces. Really glad to be here. Hannah's asked me to try and speak about some of the work that we've done at Beacon over the years, to act as a bit of a case study on how to think about strategic decisions, which isn't an easy thing necessarily to do. So what I thought I'd talk about really was the big call that we made a couple of years back to change our name, to rebrand to Beacon, and the reasons behind that, but also the way we tried to approach making that decision, and then really making a decision rather than actually implementing the change itself. So hopefully this gives you some insight into how we did that, and it's of use to you guys. So we'll see how we go. Yeah, so for those that aren't aware, on the 1st of February 2022, Find a Cure, the old name for our organisation, became Beacon for Rare Diseases, and that was after pretty much 10 years of existence in that previous name. As you can see, there's quite a difference in the name there. There's a difference in the look, a difference in the feel. There's nothing trivial about this change, and a huge amount of changes went on behind the scenes to make this happen. So this is a decision which isn't necessarily easy to make, and it creates a hell of a lot of work. So when you're going to make that decision and make that move, you've got to be confident you're doing it for the right reasons. And that means it's got to be a strategic decision. You have to hopefully try and think things through in a detailed way to understand what you're going to try and do. And this talk will hopefully touch on some of the questions highlighted here. How and when do you even begin to consider that kind of big change and that kind of big shift? What should you consider and bring into your mind when you're doing that? And how do you fundamentally make the decision? It's easy enough to have lots of reasons to do it, but what is the trigger that makes you say, I'm going to do this thing? What's the process you put in place for that? And then also really crucially, how do you prevent that being the only thing you do for a long period of time? Sitting here as a charity and spending a year changing your name and nothing else isn't fulfilling your mission and vision, that's for sure. So how do you try and tackle that in a way that doesn't consume all and everything? And to highlight this, it's really important that there isn't a right answer to any of this, and there's only approaches and ideas that you can try and use. And like I said already, the approach you use needs to account for your organization, its size and the way it's structured, and the current situation you're in, and the importance of that decision to you. So every decision you're making in this form has to be right for you as an organization, and you have to think about it in your context, not Beacon's context or Costello Medical's context or any other group. It has to be right for you. but I think there's always questions and approaches you can use to do that. So I'm going to try and talk through the process of deciding what to do itself, and that's going to have two major parts. The first part really was asking the big questions of why to do this and should we do this. You know, does a rebrand actually help us deliver on our mission? Does it make us more effective at reaching that vision we're trying to get to? Is making this change strategically required? Is it a viable thing to do in the long term? You know, can we actually going to be in a better position to reach that vision and mission by doing this? So really the questions there are, why should we rebrand, and how do we test to see if what we think we should is actually the truth? Because you don't want to do this kind of big shift based simply on an idea in the back of Rick's head. It should be an idea that's been tested across a whole range of different people to make sure Rick's head isn't having a bad day. And then part two is not just, you know, is it a good idea, but can we even do this? Can you practically deliver this project now? Is now the right time? Do we have the resources that we need right now to do this in a manner that isn't going to dominate everything we're doing? Otherwise, we're not delivering our mission, or we're just wasting time. And these are two key components of any big decision like this. Why do it? Is it right? Can we actually do this effectively? And hopefully this talk will work through that. All right, so here's our old name, our old logo, our old tagline. There's nothing intrinsically wrong with it. Let's start with that. This isn't a bad brand or a bad name, and that there's lots of positives about it. So why rebrand in the first place? I think, like I said, there's good things, right? I always felt Find a Cure was a catchy name. It was a punchy name. It was quite friendly and aspirational. That's a lot going for it right there. It's nicely laid out. The design is good. It's identifiable. People can see this and recognize it, that it ties to something. It's tied to healthcare, if nothing else, and they can recognize us. And that's a huge deal when you have a logo or a name. And that really tied to the fact that we'd established this brand with quite a good track record, and what we did as an organization over that 8-9 year period that had been operational before the change. So there was obviously a lot of good in the Find a Cure branding at this stage. There were a few other things that were maybe take or leave, if you like, or less certain. I think the tagline was a big improvement on what we had before. But it still lacked a certain level of clarity. It wasn't necessarily clear the space we were functioning in, or even what the meaning behind that was. You know, what is the common goal? You know, what are we trying to pull through here? I think it's quite bright, positive logo, but some people might feel it's dated. One or two people have occasionally commented that it felt a bit more childish in the colouring and the way that was used, which could be perceived as negative in some audiences. And then more obviously, this is definitively a scientific name. This is focused on treatment, which may or may not be the right thing for us to focus on. And certainly there's that word cure in there, which can be really problematic to certain parts of the rare disease community or the healthcare community. It could be a problem, and we're aware of that possibly being a problem. And I think that bias towards the scientific side of things, the possible issues around cure, were little alarm bells that have been ringing in the backs of our heads for, if we're honest, quite a while. But it was hard to find the right time to test that, because we were fundamentally worried that, does the name really represent what we do? And I think the question that I was always worried about, and many of us are worried about within the team, was, this is a good name, but is it our name? Is it the name of the organisation as we currently are and the work we do? And at some point that niggle just got big enough that we thought we should move forward and do something about it. So was it the name of what we do? Well, here we can see what the vision was of Find a Cure. I think this is probably taken about 2015, 2016. So Find a Cure is a UK registered charity working towards a vision of a world in which all rare diseases have treatments made together with patients for patients. Patient-centered research essentially being a big focus of the vision of the organisation there. And mission-wise or aims-wise, you know, we're building the rare disease community to drive research and develop treatments. Within this, we have two main aims, spelled incorrectly, apologies, to empower patient groups to build the patient communities, develop as a charity and drive treatment development, and to promote collaboration between rare disease stakeholders to facilitate treatment development for all. These again are perfectly good aims. They're not too badly written. They're kind of punchy enough, and you can see what's happening. The issue was probably began to come in when we compared that to what we're actually doing. I've thrown this graph together. It's not based on any real data, apart from, again, what was in my head. But I think fundamentally, as an organisation, we spent a big chunk of our time or activities on patient group training. I'd say at least 65% of our budget, maybe 65% of our time was really allocated to this action. And there's only a chunk of that training which was all about developing treatments. A huge thread was actually about growing patient groups, building communication, using social media, messaging, thinking about ways to support the community with what they needed, not just building a research landscape. Alongside that, we're running events like our showcases and conference, probably taking about 30% of our time and budget between the two. And only the conference there was purely dedicated to treatment development. And we had a few other repurposing activities buzzing around the side, but really taking up a very small amount of time and budget. So really what this kind of tells us is that there was an alignment, if you like, between the mission and vision and the name, because there was that focus on treatment development. But actually what we came to be doing, what the demand was, what the need was from us, was much more focused on upskilling and supporting the patient community and empowering them to do whatever it is they want to do. So did our name kind of do what we do, really? You know, do we do what our name suggested to people? Was cure a problem to our community? And how does a scientific name impact our ability to function in actually the things we're doing day to day? These are the questions we had, and we had a gut feeling we might not be quite in the right place, but that gut feeling isn't enough to make this kind of big decision on. What you've got to do is have an idea, a hypothesis as a scientist, and test it. You've got to find ways to go out there and collect evidence to see if what you think is right is right. So we conducted a period of research with support some of our trustees and the whole team to try and dive into this question and see, well, is the name right for us and how do we push it forward? And this was our strategy to retest it. We want to identify some key information that we need to collect and ways we can collect that information effectively. From there, we wanted to spread out the work across the whole team and trustees so that everyone felt part of this big decision. And then we got different opinions and ideas into that decision-making process and didn't overburden one person with that work. We tried to conduct that research and ask those questions in an open-minded way. We didn't go into this thinking we should change our name or go into it thinking we shouldn't change our name. We just thought, well, should we? That's generally the question here. We want to gather as many opinions as possible, hopefully not biasing the findings that we get. And then the ultimate aim was to collate all of those findings into a presentation deck that we present to the board of trustees on a strategy day. And that will be the point of decision about should we go and do something different and should we make a change. So it's a collaborative process and a process that brings in lots of different people within the organization to make that change. And we had to plan a package of work there to do that. And this slide tries to outline what those are. But again, the important thing is it was tried to be planned in proportion with the means we had as an organization at the time to deliver it and the importance of the decision. And I think it's fair to say this was an important decision, so we had to put a fair bit of resource into it, but we didn't dedicate huge amounts of funds to it at this stage. It was about putting some staff time in to ask people and talk and gather opinions. We decided to run an internal team discussion to go through the name, the branding, the messaging, and identify what worries there were internally, and that was run by one of our trustees. He also ran a discussion uniquely and just with the trustees themselves to think about their perspective on the organisation, how it developed through their time with the board. We then went to review the brand consistency. How well are we actually using this branding, the visuals, the name, and also the messages that go with it? Is that consistent across all different projects? Is it making a unified statement about what we do as an organisation? We decided to review similar groups, similar organisations to us, and what their branding is, what their messaging is, and how we compare to that, because that will give us more of a sense of where we fit in and how unique we are in the landscape. And crucially, we wanted to speak to beneficiaries, to patient groups. So we ran a number of focus groups that was led by Mary Rose to try and sit down and understand what our beneficiaries felt about our branding and name. And to give them a space where they could be critical, and we were almost begging them to be critical so we can actually understand properly what the situation was. And it wasn't just beneficiaries we talked to, we also wanted to talk to stakeholders. And this really included funders and collaborators in particular, people who were actually supporting our work to understand why they did that, how our brand and messaging helped to do that, and where there might be gaps or problems that are limiting how they can support and how much they can back us. So this was quite an extensive process, and the key point here is this is a consultative process. We are talking to lots of people and getting lots of opinions, and we're getting the opinions of people that matter to everything we do. It has to work with the internal team, this kind of change. It has to work with our beneficiaries, and it has to work for collaborators and funders, because they're the people that ultimately allow us to do the work as well as we're able to do it, with the beneficiaries being the people we want to help and support as part of that mission. So we did lots of research, and here's a quick summary of the results in an unstructured way. Essentially, we felt that Find a Cure's visual brand was pretty consistent and used well across all the different projects and work that we do. And it was also distinct, it stood out, which is a big important thing for a brand. And it felt like it compared quite well to many similar organizations, certainly the level of visual consistency. But our written messaging kind of lacked focus. It lacked a unifying theme or thread working through it. It was often confusing, and it wasn't easy to understand what we did or what we were for. That's quite a problem at times. By talking to beneficiaries, we actually found out that there were people who were turned away by our name itself, particularly the cure element. People didn't think they wanted to work with us because of that word, or they thought we were very scientifically focused and that wasn't what they wanted to do as a patient group. And that wasn't something we really realized before. And it highlighted the challenge with the name and how it aligns to what we're actually doing day to day. There were beneficiaries that did work with us that kind of explained away the name as well, which again suggested some kind of misalignment. We were definitely seen as a research-oriented organization, which based on what we had there as vision and mission, you would expect. But many people felt that name didn't necessarily reflect what we do. Again, that particularly came out from our beneficiaries. Generally, therefore, we found the beneficiaries were quite pro changing our name, but many of the companies, collaborators or funders were more cautious about it because there are big challenges and risks associated with name changes, and many of them have been through rebrand processes and found it to be quite a strenuous, challenging, expensive process. So, you know, we could just look at all this and make a guess and opinion recommendations, but there needs to be some other way of analysing it and some basic framework to do that in. And what we tried to use with many of the other bits of findings we found was a very simple SWOT analysis, which I'm sure many of you have come across before. But this essentially tries to break down all the findings into 4 different buckets, which is represented by each of the letters in SWOT. Firstly, we tried to summarise our current brand's strengths, what is good about it, what makes it work, but then also summarise the current brand's weaknesses. From there, we wanted to work out what the opportunities were for rebranding. How could that help us as an organisation do more of what we want to achieve, get closer to that vision and mission? And what were the threats? What problems might be thrown up that make it harder to do that or make us less effective at doing it? So this is a really simple tool. Anyone can do it, but it does allow you to quickly analyse decisions and do it in quite a structured way, whatever size of organisation you have. And really you're looking, once you've done this, to find ways to counter those glaring weaknesses and threats, but maximize opportunities and grow your strengths. And it may be a decision just doesn't generate enough opportunities and you have enough strength existing, you don't need to change, or it might be that there's so many glaring weaknesses and threats that you need to find a way to change to counter those. But looking at it this way gives you a really simple way of analysing what you want to do. Here's a nice SWOT grid in bright colours to wake you all up, and here's a quick overview of the kind of things we started to think about or found in this process. We had some real strengths in our brands and how we were seen within the community, which was really great to see. People felt we had a personality and a really positive feel in the work that we do, that we were a collaborative organisation, we had a really positive reputation, both in terms of how we work, but the work that we share and the skills that we try and share into the patient community. And we did feel different to other groups that they work with, which is all great to hear. There were obviously weaknesses though. We felt, looking at things and the feedback we got, there was an issue with the clarity of our vision and our purpose. That seemed to be confused at times, and it certainly wasn't communicated as clearly as it could be. We had a need to appeal to everybody. We work with a whole range of different stakeholders in what we do, and finding a message that cuts through that to reach all those different stakeholders is challenging, and that made us confusing at times. And the brand could maybe mature a little bit, whether that's in changing the colours to look more grown up, whether it's looking more modern, I don't know, but it needed to be probably tightened up a little bit visually, was something we heard and fed back. Opportunities wise, there's quite a lot of opportunities of making a change. We essentially, by rebranding, could reach a new audience and therefore grow our beneficiary pool and potentially grow our funder pool, and both of those things are really good as a charity. But particularly trying to clarify our purpose could help us attract more beneficiaries because it would become more clear what we are for and what we're trying to do. And also there was a growing funder relevance in terms of patient engagement and patient support. We have seen, whether or not we think they're doing it well or not, but we have seen pharma companies in particular trying to do more patient engagement and trying to find more ways to bring patient opinion into drug development. And this means potentially as an organization helping groups do that, we could possibly tap into that as a source of funding without having to say we were all about drug development, but actually we were all about patient engagement and empowerment, and that could still drive funding revenue for the work that we do. There were threats though. If you change your name, people might not know who you are, might not find you, you could lose your existing audience, and that's certainly a risk that we need to think about. And also, you know, we had a scientific field that did us good in terms of finding potentially scientific funders and a science audience, and there was a risk there to be managed. So we had to kind of look at all this and analyze how we should move forward. And I think one thing that strikes me looking at this now is many of the strengths that are there in this grid aren't particularly tied to a name or a color palette. They're more tied to how we do the work and the people that do the work and the way we're seen. And those strengths could all be preserved, whether you called us Findicore, Beacon or Potato. It doesn't really matter. What matters is how we do it. There's some real opportunities there, and there's certainly some weaknesses, particularly to our beneficiaries, that will really worry and I think really bore down our thinking. So this means we had to really analyze what to do, and we came to a decision that we need to make recommendations to the board as a core team that worked on this project and get their response to it. And the recommendation broadly was talking about the need to make a change, which we did. And this is the slide that I presented in that mission and that meeting, which was actually back in 2020, believe it or not. So it wasn't a fast process, which essentially said that we need to clarify our vision and mission. What should the patients we work with aspire to achieve was a thing we need to work on. Wanted to be prepared to advocate more strongly for what we think is the best way to do things or the best pathway. You know, giving strong recommendations or a way to do things isn't necessarily a bad thing if it can help groups feel more confident in how to move forward. And we didn't do that so often. We felt we needed to increase the sophistication of the branding a little bit and hopefully increase our focus on people while doing that, because it's actually people, whether in the team or in the community, that made what we do interesting, unique and powerful. And we needed to unify all the different threads of work that we do under a single simple message, theme or purpose, and that was certainly something we were aware needed to change and be improved upon. So all of that work kind of speaks to that part one. That told us why we needed to do it and how we tried to understand that. And I think hopefully the process we used made us confident that there was a need for a change, and it was based on the feedback of a whole range of people that interact with us, not just an idea that we had niggling at us internally. It wasn't a navel-gazing process, right? But could we actually do it? What would rebranding require? Like, is it actually feasible to do this? And suffice to say, there's quite a lot involved. We need to find a new name. I mean, believe me, that's not an easy process. And alongside that, you've got to create a brand that goes with it, that feels unique and that speaks to the messaging underlying that organization and that brand itself. We need to test the concept of that name and brand and make sure people like it and think it works. We'd obviously horrifically need to develop a whole new website with new messaging that goes alongside that brand, that gives a unified vision and purpose to the organization as a whole. We need to create a range of new branding materials to go alongside that. For us, that includes banner stands, that includes print materials, leaflets, guidance, that includes, you know, a whole set of social media templates that we need to put out on a regular basis. That's a non-trivial piece of work. Those print digital resources will go alongside that, as I've mentioned. We need to inform our whole network that we're going to do this. They need to be prepared for it to happen. It doesn't need to happen on a day and they're surprised, because we don't want to lose the network we've built in those 10 years. And that means we'll also need to create an effective communications campaign to tell the world that don't know about Find a Cure about the new brand when we get it, so we actually ensure people hear about this and we do achieve that opportunity of reaching a new audience. And that ties to the need for a visible launch event, an actual time, a day, a place, a way of raising awareness and celebrating this. So non-trivial, to say the least, to make this happen. Is that feasible for our organisation at this time, was then the question we had to answer. And that comes down to looking at what resources you have and what we could commit to do this. And I think it's fair to say we're in quite a fortunate position at the time we're reviewing this to think that this could be feasible for us. We didn't put a huge amount of money into doing the rebrand. It's not a trivial amount of money by any stretch, but we had a small amount of money we felt sloshing around that we could probably make available to complete this project. And most of that will be allocated to buying the physical materials that we need and to getting some of the support we needed in the website development. But probably only around £5,000 or so would have been allocated to doing the rebranding of the organisation itself. What we did have access to, though, was a lot of different pro bono support, and that's what made the difference here. One of our trustees owned a branding consultancy and could really help drive forward and lead the name generation process and get that branding and messaging tied down effectively. We were able to secure a pro bono designer seconded to the organisation for 6 months to actually implement all of that visual rebranding work and build the templates and materials we needed to make this happen. So basically 6 months of free, reasonably expert resource to make the changes that were needed, which is a huge deal. And we were also able to get pro bono support in the graphic design itself, the initial brand conceptualization of making, the graphics, the pictures, the imagery that it goes to, that designer then worked on and spread across the charity. So these are big resources available to us to make this happen, achieved at no real cost, because the real cost of doing all this would have been financially very, very, very large. We also had a major annual conference that we ran that we could actually use and repurpose to launch the organisation, which gave us that point of communication and a real hard deadline to aim for, which was actually crucial in getting this done. And we felt we could redirect quite a large proportion of the time of one of our staff members, Blaine, our marketing engagement manager, about three out of 5 days a week towards doing the rewriting for the website, refining the messaging and building a communications package to launch this over that period of time. Again, not a trivial commitment in terms of resources, but something we thought we could manage during that period to make it work. So this gave us the opportunity to do this. And essentially what this broadly means is we got to a place where the strategy, the big why we should do it, lined up with the tactics, the what we can do in the short term to actually implement this. The research identified a need to change our name and refresh a brand. It was actually potentially holding us back from supporting more beneficiaries. And that meant there was an urgency in doing this. We had to try and do it now and put some resources behind it. We were actually in a position of reasonable funding stability, which was very lucky and fortunate as an organisation, which we were able to take advantage of to actually find some bandwidth to run this quite complex project. And we had access to a lot of pro bono support to drive the project forward. So it wasn't all put on existing staff. We could manage it, but we could actually rely on more expert support to do that. And that was from both the concept development, but the delivery perspective as well, which is hugely transformative in this type of project. So the change we were looking to make was timely, it was necessary, and it was deliverable in a reasonable timeline, a feasible timeline. And that was key to be able to say, yes, we should do that. So we did. And that's why you've got these fancy slides with wavy curves and different colors on right now. That's why we're now called Beacon for Rare Diseases and not Find a Cure. And this led to that shift and evolution in our mission and a vision, which is what we were conveniently talking about at the start of this session. Our vision is now, I hope, clearer, a world in which no one faces their rare journey alone. We want to have a vision that's breaking the isolation of rare disease, because actually the heart of our mission now is around building a united rare disease community, bringing rare patients and advocates together to learn from each other, to grow their communities, to grow their patient groups, to drive that rare disease community forward, to achieve whatever is needed to achieve a better life for people living with rare diseases. That may well include the science and the treatment, but that might just include the day-to-day patient support that many of you talked about earlier. We are hopefully no longer biasing ourselves towards the science, but still helping people with the science where it's needed. But that isn't to say we've finished and this is done. The work doesn't stop. We are right now beginning a project to refine that messaging further, to have a new communications plan to push forward in the next 18 months and keep the momentum up with this. This isn't something that just is done and sits. We have to keep thinking about it and getting the benefit from what we've developed in this project. Right, so in conclusion, big changes are really scary, folks. It was not a nice thing to think about doing. It was a daunting thing, but we had to make the decision, and we had to do that based on, real information, research, and knowledge from the community. We had to try and create a clear plan to test the idea with all the stakeholders that work with us, because that gave us a way to understand the need for the change and the impact. But the scale we worked on could be scaled back, and you could just 1 or 2 funders and 1 or 2 patients, but as long as you try and engage those stakeholders to test your idea, that's the process that needs to be delivered. You need to test the idea and implement the change that fits with that organizational size and structure, and the importance of the decision as well. The same process we use could work for any of you guys, just scaled back to work with the resources that you have, or scaled up to work with the resources that you have. And the timing of these decisions does matter. external and internal factors, which might be around funding, staff resource, or the urgency of the decision, need to be considered when you try and make that change. And the fact is, we could have done this a lot earlier, but we were nowhere near the position to do it prior to that. And it wasn't really impacting us too much at that stage. There was still growth and development, but we got to a place where this really felt like it needed to happen. And that's why we made the decision. I hope that gives you an idea of the strategy behind the decision, how we did it. If nothing else, you now know why we changed our name in great detail. And I'm really happy to take any questions either now or via email or whatever later on. So thank you.
Okay, so just a little bit about the upcoming training. So obviously this was the first session. We have the second session that's going to be on project management, and that's going to happen on Wednesday the 15th from 2 until 4:30. And then after that, that's also going to be led by Costello Medical. And then after that, we have the mental health and resilience training, and that's going to be led by Rare Minds, and that's happening on Thursday the 23rd of March from 11 until 1. And just a reminder that it's expected that people do attend. If you can't, please do just shoot me an email and let me know. I have an announcement regarding the welcome and launch event. Unfortunately, this event was going to be in person. We were planning it to be in London. It would have been great to get everyone together, but of course there is a train strike on that day, so we've had to move the event online. So now it will be held virtually on Thursday the 30th of March between 1 and 3:30. And during this event, there'll be a chance to really introduce Beacon, and we'll give you an overview of the program, let you know what to expect in this coming year. But there'll also be a really good opportunity to connect with the rest of the cohort, and most importantly, meet your mentor for the first time. So you'll be able to register for this event early next week. So just keep an eye on your emails for that. And another exciting addition we have for the program this year is we have a whole section on our resources hub. So as you can see here, this is kind of what it's going to look like. There's going to be a course for mentees, a course for mentors. This is going to give you some really important information about the program. It's also going to give you some tips on how to make it as successful as possible. And we'll have an area of useful resources. So there's going to be places where you can download templates, SMART goal templates, meeting templates. Also, this will be where you'll be able to access the event recording. So like this recording and the slides are going to go onto this area, and you'll be able to access all of them on there. And then once the partnerships have been made, there'll also be an area which will give the information of the other people on the cohort. So that would be really great if you'd be able to contact others, other mentees and mentors. So that's also going to be coming out next week. So I'll just keep an eye on that. And then we have a survey. I'm going to put it in the chat. If you wouldn't mind filling it out, it's just really, it's just, really important for us to get your feedback. And other than that, just thank you so much for coming and for tuning in. And Rick can just go through those last few questions now. But thanks again. I look forward to seeing you at the next training.